Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of our program. With me today, one of our regular commentators, Don Cooney. Don is in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University and also serves as a Kalamazoo City Commissioner. Our other regular commentator, Regina Nelson, is on assignment, as we say in the business here, right? But joining us today, we have two special guests. On my right is Steve Bertman. Steve is a professor in the brand new School of the Environment, Geography, and Sustainability. Right? A combination of a number of other programs all together now.
Right.
And also joining us is Paul Clements. Paul's been on the program many times in the past. Paul is a professor over in the Department of Political Science at Western Michigan University. And Paul and Steve and myself are all part of the WMU Climate Change Working Group. And the working group is sponsoring a number of very significant events, which we're going to be talking about. But first, I'm going to have Steve start us off by giving us a little bit of the background of the working group and some of the things we've been involved in the past. Steve?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. And of course, Ron and Paul are two of the three original founders of the Climate Change Working Group back in, if memory serves me, the first meetings thinking about it were in the fall of 2012, and we gathered the first group of volunteers in 2013. So it's a group that's made up of faculty, staff, students, community members, anyone who is interested in raising awareness about the climate change crisis and what we can do to respond to it. So we focus largely on campus issues, but of course campus is part of a much larger community, and so we welcome community members to the group, and we work on community level projects as well. And I think that our Spring into Action series illustrates that pretty well. All events over the course of the semester are open to the public and free to anyone who wants to come. And not all of the events are on campus, so some of them are around the city in other places. That's the most significant thing that we're working on now, but we have worked on folding climate issues into the curriculum across campus. We've established a climate change minor that is available to any student at Western. We have established a faculty fellowship program to help support faculty that want to bring climate change into their classroom. We offer guest lectures to classes as well as to community organizations that want to learn more about climate change. So we really are involved in doing a lot of things, really important things, I think, and it's all on a volunteer basis. So these are everyone who's involved in the working group is very passionate about trying to make our future sustainable and livable for our children and grandchildren.
Well said, well said. Yes, Paul and I, along with Dave Carew from the Department of Biological Sciences, just got together and thought all of us had a strong interest in the climate issue, and we thought we needed to do something on campus. And because we have a wonderful Center for the Humanities on campus, we were able to get a small grant from the Center for the Humanities, a meeting space, and from that very humble beginning, well, we had $500 a semester or something a year when we started from the Humanities Center so that bought us some coffee and donuts, I guess, for some of the meetings. But and from that, then we started finding there were many other people in the campus community and in the larger community that were very interested in this issue, and the Climate Change Working Group has just been a fabulous group, I think, on campus. And it's nice to have the interdisciplinary perspective that comes from having political science, sociology, your background's in chemistry originally, geography, biology. I mean, we've got people from all over the place, and they all lend their particular perspective and expertise. Paul, you also run a graduate certificate program over in political science. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. In addition to the minor that Steve mentioned, a few years ago we started a graduate certificate program, which is for 6 classes. So often it'll be students who are already in some kind of graduate program and want to bring climate change specialization into their understanding, or some people who just want to come for this. Maybe they've already got a master's degree or something like that, and they want to learn about policy, about the geography of climate change, about the international politics, what we need to do about it, about what local solutions look like, more at the graduate level. So I've been sharing that for a little while.
So we're trying to look at the academic curriculum and work there, but we've also tried to sponsor research and some collaborative projects there. And as you mentioned, Steve, we've been really involved in trying to get out into the community and help educate people about this particular issue. And so over the years, we've done a lot of different things. Now, last year, I was on sabbatical leave, but you guys put together a month of activities, right, on the climate crisis. That's that right. Wasn't hard enough. You had to go do a whole semester this time.
Yeah, so it turned out to be 3 weeks because of spring break in the month of March. So we hosted 45 plus events in 3 weeks. And it was hard to maintain a level of engagement and interest, not only on the part of the students and community members who would attend those events, but people who were sponsoring them or organizing them. It was a lot to do. So we decided this year to spread it out over the whole semester. So instead of having 2 or 3 events every day, we have maybe 2 events every week. It's turning out to be a little bottom heavy. After spring break, there's a higher density of events, but we think that this is a better way to raise and maintain the awareness that the climate crisis is here, and it's here, and it's something that we have to work on.
So the term that's being used is climate emergency. Paul, why do we need to use that kind of language to talk about this particular problem, emergency, crisis?
Well, it's a crisis, I'm going to say, for a couple reasons. One is because the consequences of climate change, we know for sure in the lifetime of our students, are unquestionably going to be the biggest challenge for the global community that the global community faces. Whether we're talking about hundreds of millions of people losing their homes, having to become just almost like refugees, whether we're talking about storms getting stronger and stronger, whether we're talking about food crises around the world, whether we're talking about here in our own Michigan, so many species of fish and birds, of the kinds of trees that we've had traditionally, they're not going to make it in our new climate here. And so for students just to understand the future that they face, that's one way in which it's a climate emergency. But another way is that we started, in fact, Ron, I'm sure you remember very well, we were presenting together even for a couple of years before we started this with Dave Carew, our climate change working group. We were talking then about the need for the international community, and the international community has been talking itself through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They've been talking since 1992 about reducing global carbon pollution. But every year it goes up. It's just been increasing and increasing. So it's a crisis partly because the international community is just failing so far in what they've said they want to do. And the various programs they've put together to reduce our carbon pollution, they're not very strong. So it's an emergency for the future, and it's an emergency today. both because we already see wildfires and droughts and all. We're having plenty of effects today, but as more than that, because both the international and national responses are just utterly inadequate today.
Right, yeah. I think that the word emergency is important because it conveys the urgency that we need to be doing more now. We need to be urgently doing more than we are doing, as Paul mentioned. And so, climate change or global warming, these, are nebulous terms. People aren't sure they understand what they mean, but emergency is a word that, we learn from very young age. And so it is an emergency and we need to be acting. And so it's a very deliberate choice of words.
So what's the name of the group in England? And they got here too. Is that called Climate Emergency? The people that are dramatically stopping traffic and occupying things, what are they called? Is that called
Extinction Rebellion, I think.
Yeah, right. So you're saying the same thing as them. They're acting in very, hard ways to make this happen. You're trying to raise the consciousness and motivate people to move.
I mean, there are dozens of national, international organizations. Extinction Rebellion is one of the big ones, for sure. But here in the United States, there's, all of our main environmental organizations, whether we're talking about League of Conservation Voters or Sierra Club, traditional organizations, they've recognized that this is overwhelmingly the most critical environmental issue, period.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people working on this, but the reality is that the big oil companies, the various corporations that benefit from carbon pollution, they're able to put so much more financial resources into protecting their profits. And the reality is they're going to make profits out of this, and the consequence is going to be, we're already seeing, it's going to be hundreds of millions of deaths going into the distant future. I think any kind of ethical perspective, it's utterly, wrong, repulsive, unjust. Criminal. Thank you, Ron. Yes, criminal. So there are a lot of organizations out there doing the work, but there's a lot of opposition too.
Yeah, and there are lots of different ways to bring about social change, right? So Extinction Rebellion, focuses on a certain tack.
Strategy. Yeah,
we are using our bully pulpit, which is education, to try and make people more aware of the risks. I think all approaches are needed on this front.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Martin Luther King Jr. We had our last program focused on MLK and the radical king and his phrase, the fierce urgency of now.
Yep.
And that certainly is an apt characterization of this issue.
So what's the hope? How are we going to move this? What are we going to do? I mean, we're not getting the success that we need. So how do we move in a different direction?
Well, if you want to ask how does the global community, because climate crisis is global, carbon pollution is global, the clear critical necessity is to get our global carbon pollution from the high level that it is today down to zero globally. Interestingly, because the United States is the most powerful in the geopolitical structure of the world, United States historically and still today has not been pushing the international community to make these reductions. And although now we have a president who has taken significant steps, still because of our past weakness, in terms of our federal policy, our federal United States as a nation is still like we have 14 tons per person per year of carbon pollution, while China has about 8 tons per person and India has about 2 tons per person, and the global average is a little over 5 tons per person. So we've taken some steps, but we're still 14 tons per person in the United States compared to 5 tons as a global average, and not reducing our own carbon pollution nearly at the rate that we ought to be. So the critical thing, the most immediate thing, is to get United States and global carbon pollution down to 0 as soon as possible. But that takes, there's an enormous amount of work in that. And then as we're concerned with climate justice, I think we also have to bring immediately in the next sentence that climate change is already causing so much damage and death and destruction around the world. And here it's very clear that although the global north, the advanced countries, have caused the overwhelming majority of the carbon pollution, the harms are much greater in the global south, in the developing countries. So there's an immediate issue of severe injustice here, where the low-income countries, the southern countries, they're experiencing much greater harms. So they need some support to address those harms. Millions, we have tens of thousands of children starving already because of drought and other harms due to climate change, and the international institutions are not yet there to address those issues. So the harms in the developing countries, those things need to be addressed, as well as then assisting those low-income countries that still need to industrialize, that haven't yet industrialized. They want to take their chance too, and so they're going to need renewable energy in order to achieve the quality of life that we already have. So these are all sort of woven together as part of the climate emergency that we face.
Yeah, so you mentioned again the international community, and your talk, Paul gave a talk in this series that we're promoting here last Wednesday, and about the need for greater global action. But the global recognition goes way back. I mean, it was in 1988 that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change formed by the United Nations as a way to try to monitor the research that was being conducted by climate scientists around the world, and to issue periodic assessment reports to let us know where we were, what was happening. And those reports, as Paul, you often point out, tend to be somewhat conservative right from the get-go, because there's a time delay until they assess the research. Governments always want to put their thumb on the scale and kind of modify the reports so they don't sound quite so harsh. So even the IPCC, which is a really important organization, what comes out of there is not telling us the real urgency of the situation, I think. And then you mentioned the Framework Convention, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that formed 4 years later, 1992. And the Framework Convention sets up a series of annual meetings called the Conference of Parties, COP. You might have heard that term, COP. COP 28 just took place in Dubai at the end of last year. There'll be another COP coming up, COP 29 coming up at the end of this year. And the main work of trying to come up with treaties, agreements, pacts that will do something come out of the Conference of Parties. The most famous one, of course, is the one in Paris in 2015. So Paul, why don't you just tell people a little bit about Paris and sort of where we are now in relationship to what happened in Paris in 2015.
Sure. So as you mentioned, the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, established in 1992, and they said at that time, if you read that convention in 1992, they said we should try to get global emissions by the end of this decade, meaning by the year 2000, back to the 1990 level. That's in the text of the original convention.
Wow.
All right, but
Missed it.
they missed that one. And so, to make a long story short, the first time that they were able to get a global agreement with virtually all the countries in the world engaged in that agreement was not until 2015, and that was the Paris Agreement. And basically, it became possible because the United States and China both got behind it. That was the critical political element of it.
Yeah.
But it was still a very weak agreement. It set targets that, if you looked at the targets at that time, they looked pretty good. They said the targets, we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and if we can't do 1.5, at least well below 2 degrees Celsius. But in terms of the means were very weak. They said, well, we're just going to depend on each government making what they called a nationally determined contribution to say what it can do. And then even after you make your commitment through your NDC, nationally determined contribution, there's also, well, nothing happens if you don't do that. There are no sanctions, there's no consequences, right? So if we looked at the first round of nationally determined contributions that came in, it's still according to the official science. And you know, as you mentioned, I think we should have a little skepticism about the official science. It's a little conservative. But even according to the official science, those first round of nationally determined contributions would still have led to about 3 degrees Celsius of warming. They have strengthened a little bit since then, so now we're down to maybe 2.6, 2.7 degrees from nationally determined contributions. But if you look still around the world, most governments are not putting in place the policies that you would expect that would allow them to reach their commitment. The UNFCCC international discussions just are not very effective, have not been effective in addressing these issues. And when they set targets, the targets sound good as sort of talking points, but the reality is far worse than the targets might seem to indicate. Since 2015, you know, time goes on. Here in the United States, I think most people are so much more aware of the climate crisis because we're seeing the forest fires, because our droughts are intensifying, because we're seeing the results, and that's happening around the world. So as the results become, even in the short term, you know, worse and worse, the UNFCCC discussions have continued to move forward. For the very first time now, they have a very small fund for damage, for harms that are imposed on developing countries. They have another fund. It's actually, well, it's fairly significant. They're supposed to have, they committed actually in 2009. Okay, and this is a little, I want to get this right, okay. They committed in 2009 that by 2020, they would have $100 billion per year from the advanced countries to help the developing countries with mitigation and adaptation. You know why 11 years? Well, that's politics.
Right.
Okay.
This is called the Green Climate Fund, right?
Well, the Green Climate Fund, people often think that's what it is. Actually, the Green Climate Fund has less than 10% of that.
Okay.
Most of that money is channeled through the World Bank, through traditional bilateral development organizations, through a global environment facility, in fact, through dozens and dozens of international, mostly multilateral or bilateral aid agencies, and frankly, not very effectively from my research. But the point is, we were supposed to have $100 billion by 2020. They didn't reach it. They had maybe $85 billion by then. Actually, in 2023, they did report $100 billion, but when you look at the numbers and the accounting, there are a lot of accounting tricks. So in terms of how much real money is there, maybe it's something more in the area of $70 billion, which everyone recognizes is completely inadequate for mitigation, which means reducing greenhouse gas pollution, for adaptation, which means adapting to the effects. But a couple of years ago, you may remember, Pakistan, a third of Pakistan was flooded because they have much more extreme monsoons. They lost over $30 billion of money, which the Pakistan economy was a serious blow to their economy. Well, the Loss and Damage Fund, I think right now has less than $1 billion.
Yeah.
So that's the new thing that's just come up in the recent COP, a loss and damage fund. But you know, it's one more example of doing something which allows for some good talking points, but so far isn't really seriously addressing the level of need.
Right.
One of the things that I think we could point out here, it's a political point, but it needs to be made, and that is that we can't come up with an actual treaty at the Conference of Parties, because any treaty, of course the United States would have to be a signatory to it, but in the United States, according to our political system, any treaty that's created has to be ratified by the United States Senate, by 2/3 of the United States Senate. And currently, we have one political party in the United States that absolutely refuses to do anything about climate change, even to recognize that it's real. And we just have to get this right out on the table. I mean,
Yeah.
the Republican Party is a huge obstacle, and because of the way the United States Senate is set up, there's no chance to get a treaty ratified there. So the Obama administration at Paris had to work very, very hard to come up with some kind of a system that was an international agreement, but it had to be completely voluntary. It couldn't be a treaty. There couldn't be any legal sanctions, because if that had been in there, then it becomes a treaty that needs to be ratified. So this is a huge obstacle, because if the United States is not going to be a signatory to whatever comes out of the international negotiations, then it's not going to happen. It's not going to work.
And that's such a critical point, because most Americans just don't understand that it's the climate science denial in our Republican Party here in the United States that is politically the most significant factor blocking stronger global action.
Yes. And, I mean, you have other ideologically conservative political parties around the world, but none of them deny climate change to the extent that the United States does. I mean, you have some deniers in Australia and in the UK, but no organized conservative political party acts in the same way as the Republican Party does in the United States.
And those countries, frankly, are just not as significant politically to what's going to pass these negotiations. You know, United States is the one global strongest geopolitical power, and if the United States is not on board, it's not going to happen.
So this is a huge concern. We have this climate crisis. We have international mechanisms that we hope can deal with it, but obviously things are not happening. Right? We're not where we need to be. I wanted to go back and just mention that one of the most important environmental climate change organizations is 350.org, organized by Bill McKibben, and Paul was able to bring Bill here for a lecture. Actually, we've had him several times now. We had him by Zoom another time to come in. And Bill McKibben is one of the most important climate activists in the world right now, and 350.org has been one of the most important organizations. But people might not know the name of the organization, 350.org, comes from the idea of 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, right? And at that point, when Bill first formed that organization, we were already past 350, but Dr. Hansen, the most important climate scientist in the United States at that time, probably still is, said that we need to get back there, right? We're above 350, that's unacceptable, we need to get back, at a minimum, we need to get back to 350. And so McKibben decided to use 350. Now, where are we, Paul, 421, somewhere
around there.
around there,
421.
Steve? So we've got a long way to go to get back there. And so a lot of, I mean, and we know what to do, don't we?
Well, you know, according to Drawdown, the organization drawdown.org, you know, they've identified 150 different things that we can do right now to reduce, to not just to bring us to carbon zero, but to draw down the ambient concentration closer to the 350 target that you just mentioned. So yeah, there are lots of things that we can do, and it's interesting to look at that list. It's not, you know, build 25 new nuclear power plants. It's things like reducing food waste would have the single largest impact to achieve the Paris target of 1.5 degrees. Things that we can do right now. We don't need new technology. We need the will, and we need the organization. We need people to understand enough to put pressure, I think, locally on the people that make decisions, whether it's on Western's campus or Kalamazoo City, Kalamazoo County, state of Michigan. People need to know what the risks are, know what's at stake, and know what to push for. So there are ways of drawing down ambient CO2 without necessarily inventing new technology.
And so the biggest problem is what? Creating the political will, right? To do that. And
Yeah.
to create the political will, you're the community organizer. How do you create the political will to move people to do what needs to be done?
Well, I guess the first step is what you're doing, is to raise the consciousness. And then the second step is touch people's hearts. And then third step is give them something to do. That's the overall pattern. But as you said before, Paul, there's so much money involved in the system as it is. It's really rough to get the right story out there. That's why what you guys are doing is so wonderful. It's great to do that. I don't know at all. You guys are the experts in this whole thing. What are some of the things you're going to be doing this semester? You said you're going to have all these events. And what are some of these?
Yeah, so we've tried to do things very deliberately this semester to appeal to a really broad audience. So we've got a collection of different types of activities, some workshops, some student-run demonstrations. We've got straight-up lectures. We've got, a walking water ceremony. So we've got psychologists to talk about how to deal with the mental health consequences of what's known as climate anxiety. Or the series is anchored by a collaboration with the Lee Honors College. So every Wednesday at noon there is an event that is live streamed and presented in person at the Honors College. Most of those are kind of straight up lectures, but not all of them. And then there's a whole movie series of films that are primarily hosted by different student organizations. There are a couple student demonstrations in the Student Center that are being planned. There are activities, workshops hosted by the Office for Sustainability that students can participate in. We're going to talk about the mental health, climate justice, biodiversity. We're going to try to touch on all of the different interdisciplinary issues that are associated. And then at the very end of the semester, we are going to organize a rally to try and make a visible show of concern and interest and engagement to push our elected officials to show some spine. Can I say that on?
Sure.
So how do people find out about this? How do people find out what the schedule is, what's going on, all that?
Yeah. So thanks for asking, Don. We have a website which hopefully can be shown on the screen.
It's on the screen right now.
All right. And at that website, there's a calendar of all upcoming events. There's a listing of past events and recordings of those past events if you missed any of them. And there's contact information to get a hold of the working group. We welcome anyone who is interested to participate in any of the events, to contact us, to get more involved, come to our regular monthly meetings. We really welcome anyone who's interested in doing something. It's always more powerful and easier, I think, to do something when you're doing it with other people. So organizing is really important.
An interesting feature of the Spring into Climate Action, this whole spring series, is that we have way more student-organized events than we were able to pull off in the short time of the month last time. The students are planning a big sort of sustainability workshop at the end of the semester, I believe in April.
Right. Summit.
Summit, excuse me, thank you, Summit for Sustainability. But also there are student groups, like I have some graduate students who will be presenting on international climate justice. There are student groups talking about, what can you do in your diet? What about Oh my gosh, it's hard for me to remember all the things.
Yeah, there are events talking about regenerative agriculture, so new, the importance of eating low on the food chain to contribute action towards climate change. So
there are students also bringing in some sort of academic topics. Like there are students who are talking about international migrants, students with also local activists on refugees here in Kalamazoo. There are students who have events talking about other, again, it's hard for me to remember all the details, but other sort of aspects of the global consequences of climate change in their specific areas, of their specific interests. We also have a number of community organizations that are getting involved. The League of Women Voters is working with one of the events to let people know about voting for climate-informed voting. The Nature Center has a couple different things they're involved in. They're gonna have a series at the Nature Center, Kalamazoo Nature Center, about the indigenous people's sort of traditional respect and care for the land, and how that can influence our current consciousness and practices. And then one of their employees who works on natural, on regenerative farming, on agriculture that's more climate sensitive, she's going to come in and present. So they're just, climate change affects so many different aspects of life. And with more than 50 events, different events speak to people in terms of their daily activities, in terms of, there's going to be one on the Inflation Reduction Act. And part of the Inflation Reduction Act, as you probably know, is that there are going to be subsidies available to low-income people here in Kalamazoo.
Yes.
So if you want to get kitchen appliances that are that don't use carbon pollution, that don't create carbon pollution, that are just use renewable or just use less electricity, because of the Inflation Reduction Act from President Biden, people here in Kalamazoo, there's so many things that they can do just to spend less money and have a more sustainable lifestyle. So with our different events, they touch people in so many different aspects of their life, which is the reality of climate change. It touches so many areas of our life.
Sure
so
does.
this is also, I think, a really nice feature of it.
right.
So just what you just said, Paul, I don't know about that.
Okay.
And I'm in a position where I can get people, the community doesn't know about that.
Right.
But if you guys can help me find out about that, I can talk about that at city commission meetings. I can get the city involved and get that out to the neighborhoods. So that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's significant that just in the last year, both the city and the county of Kalamazoo have hired full-time employees
Right.
that are dedicated to focusing on this, on what can be done locally, building the movement, organizing, getting people involved and on board, and crafting plans for building a more resilient Kalamazoo. And they also, both of them are going to jointly present as part of this series in March. I think it's in March, but it's on the calendar.
So you know that Kalamazoo, that many of our low-income households, that their houses are built maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And in the wintertime, it's just really expensive for them to keep them warm.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be subsidies where they can get financial help to bring their house up to a level where it's both more comfortable and also waste less energy. And then to transition to using forms of energy for like maybe solar energy for their electricity, that's also going to be sustainable. Part of our climate change working group's history is that a few years ago we were involved in helping to establish the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, which is now an organization of 30-some community groups, one of which is League of Conservation Voters, and they're one of the key groups that have been bringing, you ask about how do you know what those subsidies are.
Right.
Well, League of Conservation Voters is one of the groups in Michigan that is providing that information as to what can local governments do, what can nonprofits do to get the financial resources that are on the table today and that will be on the table in just coming months for to make their energy more sustainable and to make the various things that they use in their life less things that produce less carbon pollution.
Well, that's great. I'll check on that. And I'll check on our person. You think our person would have been telling the commission, hey, we got this and we should be doing it. That's not happening. You brought in somebody from Ann Arbor who was working there with the community.
Right.
I was really impressed with that person. They were really doing a lot of good things.
Yeah, and she has a staff of 7 full-time
See, that's
people
the thing.
working with
Yeah,
her.
right.
So
Missy Stoltz,
we got one
Ann Arbor.
person.
that's right. And you know, she's been effective at raising money. Not all of that has come from the general operating budget. So I think it's really important for everyone involved in this to be looking for funding opportunities, taking advantage of that, especially at the city, at the city and county level, where we can affect a wider swath of the population.
Yeah.
Ann Arbor, which you're saying, Ann Arbor is one of the leaders in Michigan. They've made a commitment to they want their city to be carbon neutral by 2030. All right, what 2030, 2035. But for like the international community, we're supposed to be carbon neutral globally, according to UNFCCC, by 2050. So the advanced countries ought to be carbon neutral by 2045. And now the Biden administration is on board with that. Now Gretchen Whitmer and our Michigan state government is also on board for Michigan to be carbon neutral by 2045, which is really a great improvement. Ann Arbor says, well, we want to take the lead. We want to be carbon neutral by 2035, all right? So, and Ann Arbor, it's a very progressive community. They actually do have more money than Kalamazoo has per person. Okay, they're a little bit richer than we are, but still, Kalamazoo as a community, our city government has taken some steps, but we have a lot more to do really in Kalamazoo to set the targets and then to put those steps in motion so that both the city government and the residents of our city are just taking the steps so that we're not contributing to that problem that is creating the emergency for our current generation, for our kids, and for the people around the world.
So that's where you guys could help us a lot in the city by helping us to have that agenda and letting us know here's the steps we could take. I mean, the Ann Arbor thing seemed great, but it seems so far beyond what we have the capability to do right now. But I'm sure there's a lot of things we could do right now in the city that are not on our agenda.
Well, to be really honest here, sometimes it's partly a financial issue. Okay, when Ann Arbor put their first plan together, which was, I think in 2019, their budget was about $1 billion.
Wow.
It was about a quarter of the whole Ann Arbor city budget. Now, they knew that they were not going to get all that $1 billion from the city of Ann Arbor. And so part of that was just going out there looking for grants and one thing and another. But Steve mentioned that the city of Kalamazoo now has hired a full-time person.
Yeah.
All right, compared to 7 or 8 full-time people in Ann Arbor. But it is going to take real resources. If we have like the Foundation for Excellence, if we have some resources available, then some of that, it's going to take some of that money to put the programs in place. And again, with the Inflation Reduction Act, part of the opportunity is that you have to spend money to save money. That there now are all these federal dollars on the table, but for our community members and for our nonprofits and for our local organizations and for our city government organizations to get access to those funds, you've got to put the plan together. I'm actually working with the Nature Center. The Nature Center is putting together a proposal where they're going to get they're probably going to get it to add to their solar panels, to put in electric EV chargers, and they also want to be carbon neutral by 2035. So the money's there, but you've got to do the work to get that money.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned things at the city, we talked about the state, and of course the federal government, the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, it's obvious that at the time inflation was a big issue, and they wanted to tie it to the idea that we were reducing inflation. But it really is a climate bill for the most part. I mean, significant parts of that Inflation Reduction Act deal with the climate issue. And so it shows what can happen at the federal level, on a national level, if we have people, a president, and majorities in the Congress that are capable of pushing this forward.
Right.
So again, it just shows the politics of climate change, and that's going to be another topic that we're going to focus on. One of our events at the Honors College in March is going to focus on the politics of climate change. I think some guy named Kramer is supposed to be presenting that.
We're going to let you talk about that.
And we're going to do a critical issues program. We have John Clark, who's a professor and chair of your department, to come in and talk about where we're at in terms of the 2024 election. Denise Keel, another former colleague of yours in political science, who now is working with the Michigan Climate Action Network. They're both going to be here with us to talk about where we're at in terms of the primaries and the shaping up of the election in 2024. It looks pretty clear that it's going to be President Biden running against Donald Trump again. But this election is so critical because we know that the Trump administration did absolutely nothing. In fact, did destructive things. Its last, when it was in office. The Biden administration hasn't done enough, I think. We could probably be fair to say. They should have been doing a lot more. But given the circumstances that they find themselves in, and with losing the House in the last election has hampered the ability for the administration to do all that it wants to do, but it has done some pretty significant things. And so politics really play an important role, and so that's something we're going to be talking about as we move forward in the series here. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there some other events that you haven't talked about yet that you think you want to try to let people know about?
So one thing that I think is way cool is that our fine arts department at Western Michigan University has some new faculty who wanted to put together a competition for videos and for short films that just address different aspects and different through various media. And they wanted to do this, and we sort of partnered with them. We put some significant money towards this. We did. Right? So they've put together already a competition where they've had more than 40 entries from around the world of mostly, I believe, films and short media visual pieces.
Focused on video.
Focused on video.
Yeah.
But then we'll just have like a 2-hour presentation, I think later on in March, is it?
April.
Or April, where the winners of their competition will get to show their creations. And that's something that we just have never done before. I thought that's pretty cool.
Right. We also have, there's a class on playwriting, which interestingly is taught out of the English department, not out of the theater department, but whatever. That is using this opportunity, this series, and the issue of climate change as a prompt for their entire semester's work. And so we haven't gotten the details yet, but we're hopeful that some of these short 10-minute plays that students write this semester will be shown and displayed or performed. Probably also in the April timeframe.
So I want to give a shout out to one of my students. I'm on the dissertation committee for a student in economics he's from Pakistan. And part of his dissertation research is he went back to Pakistan, and I mentioned a little while ago they had this big flood, which is way worse because of climate change, intensifies the humidity in the atmosphere, the moisture. And so he did a study of 2 villages, one right where the flood, that was very much a flood affected, and then a very nearby village that didn't have the flood effect, and says what's happening to the children, what's happening to the families, are people having to leave, what are the consequences, and he'll be presenting that research as just one more event in part of our program. And I'm self-interested. Okay,
Sure.
Here, that's good. But that's just one more example.
Yeah, we've mentioned a couple times events associated with agriculture, and the ability, I mean, one of the big risks, one of the most probably immediate threats of climate change is the ability to produce food to keep 8.1 billion people on the planet alive. And, floods, droughts, inconsistent precipitation patterns, unable to, late season frosts, all of these things,
Scorching heat?
Scorching heat, of course. All these things threaten our ability to produce food, which of course is fundamental. And but a big part of the risk is the loss of insect pollinators. So biodiversity of ecosystems is something sometimes is sort of swept under the rug or considered in a separate category, but it is an enormously important issue. And one of the I think one of the strongest proponents in this country, Doug Tallamy, who's a professor at the University of Delaware, is going to be presenting in February on his book called Nature's Best Hope, which describes things that everyone can do in their own backyard to address the insect pollinator, sometimes referred to as the insect apocalypse. We have lost almost 80% of our insect population, and E.O. Wilson has a famous quote saying, that would be the end of civilization if we lose those insects. So this is an opportunity. He has an idea, a plan that he calls the Homegrown National Park. Which is something very concrete, something that everyone can do. It's low budget to create pollinator corridors without having to wait for big government action. And so I encourage everyone to come to that presentation and pay attention to his ideas.
My wife is the gardener in our family, and she's been watching. She knows Tallamy. Not personally, but she knows his work.
Yeah.
Our Winchell neighborhood is a neighborhood where a lot of just the households, get this. Mm-hmm. And having so many more butterflies in your backyard, because the insects are there, the birds are also there.
Oh, right.
It's just so nice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah. We also have, I know there's a group in town that you've been affiliated with, Hope for Creation, which is the religious community seeing climate change as an important issue. And we just have a few minutes left, can you talk a little bit about Hope for Creation and the religious perspectives that feed into the action on climate change?
Sure, yeah, I mean, every mainstream and religious organization has a statement on stewarding our natural world, preserving our natural world, and but often we don't see people putting their money where their mouth is, and so the Hope for Creation organization, again, volunteers, peoples of faith from houses of worship or independent, just peoples of conscience, perhaps, getting together to try and use the built-in organization of these houses of worship to push their congregations and their communities to act on climate change on behalf of the natural world. And they're part of the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition and part of Spring Into Action as well. So
I was going to say, do we have Hope for Creation in the schedule someplace in there to do something?
We are waiting on a few details.
Okay.
But we will be on the calendar soon.
Great,
Yeah.
great. All right, in just a minute or so we have left. Is there one other thing going on as part of the series that we haven't talked about yet that you want to get out there?
Well, we have mentioned it, but I want to bring us back to the big rally in March,
Yes.
April 19th, because we've been saying all the way along that the key action, we all need to do what we can in our own lives, for sure, no question. And there's so much that each one of us can do. But we're not going to get the change we need except through the political process,
Right.
except through the political leadership. And so our march will be for climate justice. And one of the things that I know is going to be on the agenda, we don't have the agenda yet, but I know it's going to be there, is our presidential election. Because if we were to elect a climate science denying president, which Donald Trump is, it would be if he were to be reelected, that's the end of the road for our current global negotiations on climate change. If the United States is going backwards, we're not going to see China and India making the investments that they would have to make, making the sacrifices in some cases that are needed. If the United States is not at the table, nothing, much less is going to get done internationally. So overwhelmingly, the most significant political decision this year for the climate crisis is who is the president of the United States. And if it turns out to be Biden, who may not be perfect, but who's done actually more than any other president before.
Right.
In terms of the actual immediate consequences of the policies that he has pushed. He's done more to move America to be carbon neutral towards that direction than even than Obama before him. So we need to see more, but he's done pretty. He's done what he can, maybe, or he's done a lot politically. If he's our president, then the global process moves forward. If we have a climate science denier as our president, which is what we would get with Trump, then the global process basically slows down, or maybe even in some respects goes backwards. And that is a disaster for the planet and a disaster for humanity. And so I know that's going to be one thing that our Climate Justice March and the speakers around it will be addressing.
Great. Well, thank both of you for coming today. Steve Bertman, Paul Clements, thank you for coming in. Thanks for the great work in getting this climate emergency series organized.
Great.
Don, thank you. Always great to see you. And we invite you to come back again and join us on Critical Issues, Alternative Views.